So let's deploy the first node. We go to mysupport.netapp.com and we log in using an authorized account in order to be able to download the simulator. Then we go to Downloads and Product Evaluation, because that's where we will find the simulator. And then we select the Data ONTAP simulator itself. And the next thing we see is some system requirements and installation stuff. We scroll down and accept and continue, after which we can start downloading the simulator. Well, the oldest version available is 9.5. We are not going to use that. We are going to use the one all the way at the bottom, which is the 9.9.1, which is the latest version at this moment. Now, I prepared my desktop environment with a folder called Downloads, and I want to download the files that I need into that folder. So I select the desktop, I select the Downloads folder, and I will start downloading the simulator. Now that will take quite some time depending on your environment. In the meantime, I'm going to get the rest of these files as well. So the Quick Start Guide, I'm also going to pick the Installation and Setup Guide, and finally what I absolutely need is the license file. If I don't have the licenses for the protocols, I will not be able to set up NFS, I will not be able to set up CIFS. So you will need the licenses. And once the simulator is downloaded, then I can start deploying it. I am opening it with my VMware Fusion tool, and that will import the OVA. I continue. And then I'm going to decide that I want to store it on my SSD, which is an external device. I want to, because it takes quite some space, right? So you need some additional space to store your simulator. Now, once it has imported the OVA, I see that we have 6 gigabytes of memory. Also, we see that we have a private network interface, another private network interface, and we have 2 shared network interfaces. Well, it's very important. The shared network interfaces should be changed. So interface 3 and 4 should not be shared. They should be set to auto-detect when you have a Mac environment, or when you've got VMware Fusion on Windows, you should set them to bridged. So third and fourth interface should be set to auto-detect or bridged depending on your environment, because you want to be accessible from the outside as well by clients. Then we can add 2 more interfaces maximally. So we add a 5th and a 6th interface, which we also set to auto-detect. So again, the first 2 network interfaces should be set to private, because they are for the cluster interconnect. The others should be set to auto-detect or bridged. So when that's all set, we can boot our virtual machine for the very first time. And let's make this screen a little bit larger, and what we do is absolutely nothing. We simply let it boot. Well, we can enter return here, otherwise we'd have to wait for 16 seconds. So we're not going to do that. And we see it's booting 9.9.1 for the very first time. We get a lot of messages, we simply ignore all of that. Mind you, if you have an older release, you should definitely check out disk initialization. We're not going to do that because it's not necessary here. So we log in as admin, and when we run cluster setup, it will ask us some questions. So it warns us that we should set up auto support later on. So we simply acknowledge that, we say yes, we'll do that, enter the node management interface port, which defaults to E0C, which is the 3rd interface. Then we add the node management IP address. In my case, that's going to be this address. I'm going to use class C netmask, and the node management interface default gateway. You could set it to whatever you like. We're not going to be using it. Okay, so I set it to my router, and that's it. Then we are done, and we can continue using the command line interface or the browser. We're going to use the CLI. Very important question. Are you going to create a new cluster or join an existing cluster? Well, obviously, we're going to create a new cluster. Is this going to be a standalone single node cluster? No, it's not. It's going to be a multi-node cluster, so the answer would be no. then you should make a note of these two addresses. These are the cluster interconnect addresses of the first node, and you will need one of these two later. So make a note of that. Then we enter the admin password. We have to do that twice. We enter the cluster name, which is going to be cluster 1. You can change that later if you like, but I'm going to call it cluster 1. Then it's going to start up the cluster services. That might take quite some time again. But once it's done, it will ask us if we want to install some licenses. We are not going to do that right now. We'll keep that for later in another module. So we ignore that. Then we have to enter the cluster management interface port, which is E0D by default, but I can switch it to E0C as well, and I'm going to do that. So we will have two IP addresses on port E0C, which is the node management IP and the cluster management IP. Again, class C. Then it says, well, there is no valid failover target. Well, obviously that is correct because we have not yet set up the second node and the cluster management interface has been created. So you can use this address to connect and manage your cluster. Also, I'm going to enter the DNS domain name that I want to be using for the cluster, which is netapp.local. It might not be the same in your environment, but in mine it is, because my Windows machine has an Active Directory and a DNS of netapp.local. Then we run a cluster show and it simply tells us that we have one single node in the cluster and it's healthy, and forget about eligibility. It simply means that it will take part in the cluster. Also, let's have a look at the IP addresses. We can do that using the netint show command. And that will tell us these two addresses we talked about just a second ago, these two private network interconnect interfaces, 161 at the end and 171, we should keep those in mind. Then we look at the version and we see we have version 9.9.1. And we're very happy.